So thank you everybody for joining Conversation Design 101. I'm Emily Peck. I'm head of Conversation Design here at Netomi. Over the past 8 or 9, going on 9 years now, I've probably worked on hundreds of different virtual assistants, everything from children's toothpaste to insurance, airlines, and even big Hollywood studios. So had a lot of really great projects that I've worked on, but there's something that's the same no matter what company it is, no matter what their audience is. There's one specific goal in mind. There are the users who are interacting with these virtual assistants have a goal that they want to accomplish. So as conversation designers, we need to think about how can we help them reach their goals as quickly and effortlessly as possible. So what exactly is conversation design? So it's the art of designing dialogue and interaction workflows for virtual assistants. And there's a couple of key things that we need to keep in mind. First and foremost, like I was just mentioning, we want to make sure that we're goal-oriented. We want to help our users reach their goal as quickly and efficiently as possible. So whether that's booking an upgraded seat on a flight, or tracking an order, whatever it is, so we want to help them get that information as quickly and effortlessly as possible. We also want to engage naturally. So we want to mimic real-life conversation. We don't want to sound robotic. We don't want to remind our users that they're, in fact, talking to a machine. We also want to adapt. We don't want to have the same experience for everybody. We want to tailor the interaction to the specific user that we're talking to and their context, and also pick up on sentiment so we can tailor the conversation even further. And we also want to be consistent. We want to have a tone that's consistent throughout the entire interaction. We want that tone to align with the brand. We don't want something to seem, a very corporate brand to have something that's very flamboyant. We want to have something that's very that's on brand with what your customers would expect, that makes sense for both you and your users. There's a few typical downfalls that we see with virtual assistants. So we kind of want to avoid these at all costs. The first, which is probably my biggest pet peeve, is sending huge blocks of information all at once. So whether that's in one message or multiple sent in a row, both are a terrible end user experience where no one wants to read all of that text at once. And also, when we just think of a virtual assistant as an FAQ or a help center article in a different form, this also becomes very generic. We are not actually helping the specific user that we're talking to. There's also virtual assistants that tend to get very confused. And there's always going to be a situation that maybe is out of scope, that the virtual assistant hasn't been trained on or should never participate in a conversation about, but we want to make sure that we plan for those and have graceful fallbacks in place. There's also a tendency to have a lack of variation. So virtual assistant says the same thing over and over again. Maybe it's one of those fallbacks or an out of scope message where we're trying to bridge back to the core use cases of the virtual assistant. But if we're saying it the same way every time, that becomes a very robotic, very unnatural experience. So with our task-oriented virtual assistants, these are the ones that are in customer support, marketing, or sales. There's 3 core resolution paths that we can take to reach those goals. The first is universal response. So this is going to be the same for everybody, no matter who your customer is, what loyalty tier they are. We have the same response for everybody. We'll try to get this as succinct as possible. There's also what we call contextual responses. So this is still informational in nature. We're not yet integrated into those backend systems, but we're able to ask 1 or 2 simple questions in order to pull out the most relevant information that this user cares about. So say I'm a retailer with 10 or 15 stores, and somebody just asks, well, what time does your store open? Instead of listing out all my 10 or 15 stores and their specific hours, we can ask, well, what's your zip code, or what city are you in? And then we can pull out the information to this user's local store. And then we have personalized resolutions. So this is when we're integrated into backend systems. So we're able to look up customer-specific information. This is really where virtual assistants can shine and provide incredible value to your users. All of that end-to-end resolution within the chat interface itself. So when we're thinking about creating our dialogue and kind of starting a new project, we want to make sure that we're first and foremost starting with a great introduction. We want to set ourselves up for success from the beginning. There's a few things that we need to keep in mind when we're writing our introductions. First, we want to welcome the user. We want to be friendly. You're not going to walk up to somebody in a grocery store that you haven't seen and just start asking them questions or telling them all about you. No, you want to at least say, hello, or, great to see you, welcome. You want to provide a very clear overview of what the virtual assistant can and can't help with. You want to be transparent that they are a virtual assistant, that this is our scope, but you also don't want to be overly wordy. So you don't want to have a situation where you're then listing out, all the 20 ways that this virtual assistant can help. We want to keep it, maybe high level. So instead of I can help you check in for a flight, upgrade your seats, change seats, we could just say I can help you manage an upcoming flight. So we maybe stay on the category level. We also can use UX tools like menus, buttons, and carousels to help guide the conversation forward. But we want to keep list options to 4 or 5. We can always have a something else button, but we don't also want to overload our users with too many options. We can always have subcategories as well. Here's an example of a great introduction. Welcome, I'm the Sullivan Airline virtual assistant. I can help you report a lost bag or manage a flight. What would you want to do? And then there's our options presented in nice, easy to tap buttons. So something that's even better, Netomi, for instance, can have these menu options be dynamic. So we can change those based on who a person is. So if it's somebody who has a flight later today, maybe we can anticipate what their needs and questions might be, versus somebody who had a flight yesterday. So their options and when they're opening and starting a chat with the virtual assistant probably going to be different. So can we anticipate that? Can we help decrease that time to resolution, help them reach that goal quicker by changing these options that we're presenting to them? We also want to really pay attention to shortening the text. So going back to one of those big downfalls from the beginning, something we see all the time across industries is just way too much information and content sent at once. So the idea here is to use 1 to 3 really lightweight sentences, getting rid of all the extra fluff. And max 2, 3 at the very high end messages sent in a row. But regardless, you never want to have your users having to scroll up to start the conversation. Probably not going to do that. And if there is anything really necessary that they read and understand at the beginning of your message, they're totally going to miss that. We want to be informative, but brief. So we want to shorten it as much as possible, but we also don't want to go overboard. So then there's questions remain. We want to make sure that we're thoroughly answering a question, but just in the most succinct way as possible. We also want to use active voice. So this is a way that just naturally can shorten the text, even if it's just one or 2 words. So the example on the top is passive voice. So a refund was issued for your ticket. Instead, we can say, we issued you a refund. We also don't want to monopolize the conversation. We're going to get into taking turns in a little bit later, but we really want to invite our users to participate in the conversation. So one way to do this, and this is one of my favorite tactics in conversation design, is, say somebody comes in and they ask about flying with a pet or bringing their dog with them on an airplane. So we want to answer their question off the bat, but then we want to anticipate if they're asking about this, is there other topics that they might be, interested in as well? So really relevant to what they asked about. So we can opt in instead of just providing every possible connected piece of information to this question. We can answer what they asked and then said, well, now would you like to hear about kennel requirements? Maybe this passenger doesn't need to know that, already has this information or has flown with their pet before. They don't need this. But we're inviting our users to opt in for relevant information. We are, pushing that conversation forward, but we're not just assuming that they need to know all of these bits of pieces of information. We also want to try to remove as many words that aren't contributing to the goal of the conversation. So this is something as writers, we have a tendency to overwrite and over-explain. But you'll often find if you go back, the next day or even, kind of do another task and come back and just start editing and trying to cut down words, you can cut out a lot of extra fluff. So instead of saying, I can help recommend some super delicious restaurants for dinner tonight, we could say, looking for a restaurant. So the intent of what we're saying, the message behind, both examples is the same, but we're saying it a lot more succinctly. And especially in chat and messaging interfaces, we're used to having, really brief conversations. We're used to, not over explaining when we're texting our friends and family. So let's try to do that when we're designing for virtual assistants as well. We also want to reduce the cognitive load. We want to make it as easy for the human brain, the users that we're talking to understand and comprehend what we're saying. And there's a few really simple tweaks that we can do to do this. So one is using symbols and numerals over text. So instead of writing out, you're looking for a reservation for 4 at 7:30 this evening, right? No, let's just make it simple. You're looking for a reservation for 4 this evening at 7:30. The example on the right is just a lot easier for the end user to comprehend and read quickly. Another way to do this is using contractions. So, this can shorten the text and shorten the amount of words that we're saying, but it can also make it feel more natural. So instead of saying, I cannot find any flights from Los Angeles to Miami this Saturday. Are your travel dates flexible? Just making one quick change. I can't find any flights. Again, this is a small change, but it can really go a long way in making the interaction feel natural and conversational. Which brings up the next point. We want to think when we're looking at all of our interaction flows, is this something you would overhear at a coffee shop or at a restaurant, or how two friends would interact with each other? We don't want to sound robotic. We want to sound really conversational. We also want to use simple everyday language. This opens up the virtual assistant to be able to help more people. I think the latest I read was writing at a 4th or 5th grade level. So we don't need to use overly complicated words that a lot of folks are not going to understand. You're not going to make the brand sound smart. You're really just going to maybe scare some people off from interacting with the virtual assistant. So really try to use that simple everyday language. We also want to use variation as much as possible, and we don't want to tell people what to say. So in this example, you're not going to hear two friends over coffee saying, well, say change ticket if you want to change your ticket, or say cancel ticket if you want to cancel your ticket. I've seen this referred to as parrot syndrome or something. So we don't want to bark orders and tell people what to say. Instead, just rewriting this to, would you like to change or cancel your ticket? Feels a lot more natural, feels a lot more conversational. So again, to the point of using that simple everyday language, we want to have our users forget that they're talking to a machine. We never want to pretend that we are a human. We want to always be very transparent that this is a virtual assistant that they're talking to. We never want to try to pass ourselves off as a human, but we still can eliminate that reminder every time with every message sent that we're not sounding overly robotic. So again, two people are, humans to humans talking would never say, your transaction has been completed. A confirmation email with your booking details has been sent to the address you provided. Would you now like to look for accommodations? It's just so unnatural. You would never hear people talk like that. Instead, you'd probably hear, you're all set. I've emailed you the details for your flight. Do you also need a place to stay? So trying to take a look at all of the content that you're writing across the board to make sure it sounds natural. If you want to even say it out loud, work with a colleague to kind of role play and talk through your various workflows, that can really help as well. Because I think oftentimes when you hear it out loud, you're like, okay, that's not, that doesn't seem natural. So we want to use variation. So this is particularly important in what we call standard vocabulary. So these are the things like our greetings, how we're welcoming our users, how we're saying goodbye, reprompts. So if we have to ask somebody to ask something again or try it a different way, we want to make sure that we've got variation there. So if we have to, have this triggered once or, multiple times in a conversation, it doesn't sound robotic. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that to make it feel natural. The same goes with escalations and acknowledgements and different menu options. If someone says, what can you do? What are the topics you can help me with? We want to make sure that we have variation so it feels natural. Now I'm going to get into taking turns. When we think about a virtual assistant, chat, messaging, email, voice, this is not your user is not coming to a help center. They're not looking to just read an article. They're expecting to participate in a conversation. One of the things that makes something a conversational interface, which virtual assistants are, is that it's participatory, it's back and forth. Users expect to be able to participate in the conversation. So taking turns is fundamental to having a conversation, and it can help to shorten responses. So when we're designing our dialogue to go back and forth, we can avoid sending too much text at once. If we have designed, conversations that, we're asking for inputs from the user, we're having them opt in to move the conversation forward in a few different ways. It can also help us make it relevant to the person that we're talking to, not say too much or too little, and really surface that bite-sized, easily consumable piece of content that's optimized for relevance for this particular user. It can also help, meet users' expectations. To what I was just saying a second ago, people expect to participate. They don't want to come and open a chat on a brand's website and just have tons of messages sent to them back to back and have to read basically what the help desk article in a smaller piece of real estate. They want to participate. A lot of times people have already tried to self-serve on the website and they're coming because they didn't quite get what they wanted, or maybe they're lazy. They don't want to go read everything and they just want to be able to ask a simple question and get their response and get on with their day. And it also helps us, put clear calls to action in place. We can put the users into action if we've designed our prompts and our dialogue correctly. So 75% of human-to-human interaction is nonverbal. I've seen this even as high as 90% in some research. So this is all, the body language, facial expressions, hand gestures, eye contact. Well, with virtual assistants, we don't have all of this. So we really need to invite turn taking and invite people to participate in the conversation and know when it's their turn to jump in and say something with really well-designed prompts and workflows. A couple of key best practices here is we want to, ask users if we're asking the user to participate, though, we want to make sure that we're giving them a better experience. If they're, providing a response, then we don't want to kind of ignore what they've said and just provide all of the information at once. If we are effectively taking turns, we are narrowing down that information to make it a lot more relevant for them. We want to keep it crisp. We don't have too much information sent in our back and forth dialogue. We also want to end with the action. We want to ask the question at the end of a message. So instead of, this example on the top, let me see if there are upgrades available. What's your reservation number? I can't promise we have anything available, but I can check. So if the user just kind of reads the last few words, some people just kind of skimmed the bottom, they're going to miss the prompt that we have. What's your reservation number? The virtual assistant in this case needs that in order to check on upgrades. But since it's buried in the middle, there's a high probability that the user might skip it or then have to go back and reread it and just, then the conversation can get off track. So we really want to make sure that we're ending with an action. Our prompt is at the end of a message. We also don't want to put the burden on the user to move the conversation forward. We, as conversation designers, we really want to take that burden on. We want to make sure that we've designed conversation that's really effortless for the user to participate in. So if somebody asks, are there upgrades available on my flight? And we just say yes. Now put the burdens on our user to think of the next question. So I guess they got their information that they're, the answer to that specific question, but that's not really their intent. That's not what they're looking for. So now they have to kind of think of, all right, well, what do I ask next? So instead, we want to design our resolutions that we are kind of spoon feeding our users kind of the next piece of information, or guiding them to guiding that conversation forward. So instead of just saying yes, we could say, well, yes, I have a business class and first class seat available. Which would you prefer? We're putting the user into action. they know that they, have to make a choice. There's 2 options here. They can make their selection, and then we're going to move forward with that booking. So there's a couple of types of questions that we have at our disposal when we're thinking about designing our prompts and designing that, really paying attention to that turn taking. So the first is open-ended. So these definitely feel a lot more conversational and natural. The user can type, kind of whatever they want. You have to make sure that your AI can hold up to this and can answer a wide variety of questions that people ask. One way to use open-ended questions is to put some framing around it from the beginning. So I can help you check into a flight, or upgrade your seat, or maybe there's larger categories. So how can I help? And then the user has a kind of broad understanding of what the virtual assistant can help with, so that can help frame their question. Something that's also very popular with virtual assistants in particular is these menus and options types of questions. So here you're giving very specific choices to the user that they can select from. So an example, are you looking for swimsuits, sandals, or cover-ups? So as the user, I know that these are my 3 options. So I should make one of these choices. Another way to use some of those UX tools I talked about earlier was putting these options into buttons or carousel themselves, so people can tap or click instead of having to actually type out their response. Binary. So these are yes or no type questions. These are good. It's really clear for virtual assistants to understand. However, if you use too many of these, that can get very robotic sounding. So if you're going to use binary questions, you really want to use that as part of kind of a larger mix of question types. Oops, got a little cut off there. And then there's quantifying questions. So this is when we're asking for a specific number. Maybe it's a zip code, maybe it's, how many tickets somebody wants, or how many pizzas, or whatever it might be. But here is another way to put the user into action, get them participating in the conversation and moving that conversation forward. Okay, so that was kind of the quick high level tips and tricks, best practices for conversation design 101 today. I know we have a follow-up session next month about designing personality for your virtual assistant. Well, I hope that was beneficial and of use to all these conversation designers out there. If you have any questions, please feel free. I'm Emily at netomi.com. Please feel free to reach out.